Hello everyone, and welcome to the 4th episode of my journey to the 3D Zelda challenge. This time, we will be exploring The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess 80%. And yeah, I know what you may think. I can be pretty sure that my next step for the 3D Zelda challenge will be either The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask 80% or The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker 80%. I am sure that this is going to be a blast. Basically, don't trust what I say when it comes to plans. That's the lesson here. But that's enough sidetracking done over here. Now here we are on Twilight Princess 80%. The video, pretty much as usual, will be composed of some context about the category or speedrun as a whole, which I decided to make its own section this time around. This is then followed by a breakdown of the run, a run-through of the best resources that may be used to learn, as well as tips and tricks on certain sections of the run for beginners like me, and finally, the marathon safety of the run, as once again all of this is done within the context of the 3D Zelda challenge. So now, let's get started. At the moment that I am making this video, Twilight Princess 80% is currently the longest 80% speedrun within the 3D Zelda games, discounting remakes, with the current world record of 2 hours, 54 minutes and 9 seconds held by OT. The next game being Skyward Sword 80% with a world record of 2 hours, 9 minutes and 22 seconds. Sorry to interrupt again, but it could basically be said that it was the world record for Skyward Sword. And when I was editing this video, as it turns out, Skyward Sword got broken again, and now the world record is under 2 hours. So yeah, I won't go into the details, but I would definitely recommend to check out the new world records that are going on with Skyward Sword, because it is crazy. But yeah, that only makes the gap between Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword even larger. Sorry for that, but yeah, let's go back to the video. That's a pretty large gap between the two, and I think it's a good way to start talking about the speedrunning scene of this game, especially in the past year. As many people within the Zelda speedrunning community know, 2019 was an insane year for speedrunning 3D Zelda games. Ocarina of Time got ACE, Majora's Mask got Moonwarp, and then itself got ACE, although that was in early 2020. The OG Wind Waker got Bear Skip, and Skyward Sword got RBNs, and of course, Wind Bombs in Breath of the Wild. You can already notice that, well, there is one game missing among all these achievements: Twilight Princess. The struggle that Twilight Princess glitch hunters and routers have been facing is a lack of big discoveries that can severely cut down the route. Even some of the most significant skips in the current route were actually discovered a long time ago, including for instance the early City in the Sky skip, that was discovered much closer to the game's release rather than now. Now, do take into account that I am talking about the GameCube version of the game, because for instance, for the HD version of the game, there was a discovery of early Snowpeak recently, leading to quite a significant drop in time for the 80% category. The entire reason why this is groundbreaking for Twilight Princess HD is because what we use on the GameCube version of the game to get past that moment is map glitch, which isn't on the HD version of the game, nor on the Japanese version of the GameCube version. Despite that, the moral of the story is to remember that in speedrunning, we must never give up. It took years for tricks such as Bear Skip to be found, so much so that it used to be considered the holy grail of speedrunning. It is not because those discoveries haven't happened now that they won't in the future. Now when it comes to learning Twilight Princess 80%, something that I can definitely say is that it is hard. By Hylia, Twilight Princess 80% takes the cake for being the most difficult run I have learned so far, and I can only shudder when I think about Wind Waker 80%. Ooh. But to be honest with you, a lot of the hard work can be blamed on myself because there's actually a beginner-friendly route that skips most of the stuff that is really difficult, and I didn't do it. So yeah, silly me. But now that I will discuss more when we get to it in the later sections of the video. With all of that said, we shall now move on to the breakdown of the run. Now, before we go through the usual breakdown, I'd like us to take a bit of a moment where we'll actually look at it backwards, so we can understand why we have to do things certain ways in this run due to various requirements. Do note before we go ahead that I am taking the world record route as a reference, and routes such as the beginner route do differ in some ways. Either way, let's go. As for pretty much any Zelda game, the goal of the run is to beat Ganondorf at the end of the run. To get to the final battle, we need to be able to get to Hyrule Castle, which requires the barrier around Hyrule Castle to be broken. For that to happen, we need to have the Palace of Twilight finished. To get to said Palace of Twilight, we only need the final shot of the Mirror of Twilight in our inventory, meaning completing the City in the Sky. Why only the last piece of the shot from City in the Sky? Well, that is because that dungeon is the last one completed prior to the Twilight Palace, when playing casually, and therefore, internally, it is the only one that the game will actually check is completed to trigger the cutscene of the opening of the portal to the Palace of Twilight. But to access the Palace of Twilight, we need to finish Arbiter's Grounds, which in turn requires being able to access Gerudo Desert, which in turn requires the Midnight's Desperate Hour section to be done. But for that to happen, Lakebed Temple needs to be complete. And all of that is after obtaining the ball and chain from Snowpeak, because that is necessary for the Zant fight. We then also need the Twilight in the Lanayru region to be cleared in order to much later be able to get a cannon ready to get to City in the Sky. But for that to happen, the Lake of Hylia needs to be filled up, which requires teleporting the smoldering piece of rock that falls in Death Mountain, an event which, as you may already guess, only happens when the Twilight is cleared in Eldin. Now take all of that, and prior to all that, add having to obtain the Claw Shot, as well as obtaining the Boomerang so that we may perform LGAs throughout the run, which is an essential trick to use. And before even that, the early Master Sword, which allows us to transform between human and wolf form at will, even within the Twilight, as well as getting early Iron Boots at the beginning of the run with some back-in-time shenanigans, and that is Twilight Princess any % backwards, basically. Now, said all that way, it may sound a bit confusing with all the requirements flying left and right. If anything, I suppose you now understand why this run, even at world record pace, does take almost 3 hours. Now, since we've laid down all our elements on the table, let's clearly put them up here in order so you may understand. The run starts off at the very beginning, where we perform a gate flip to go to that bridge and perform a back-in-time glitch. This allows skipping a large part of the infamous introductory sequence of the game, leading us inside Farron Woods with the Hylian Tunic, Hylian Shield and Odin Sword. And with the sequence break and other shenanigans, we are able to get the Iron Boots very early, quite convenient for us. Since we skipped most of the intro, we can then get into the cutscene where the children get kidnapped right outside Order, which will therefore not only transform Link into wolf form and get him to Hyrule Castle, but also trigger the Twilight Realm in Farron. With that in mind, we finish the Hyrule Castle section and I get back to Orden as Wolf Link. And at this point, there is the infamous Sword and Shield skip to immediately get to Farron, now steeped in Twilight. You definitely may add Sword and Shield skip to the list of things I will be talking about later. Once we are inside with the Twilight Farron, this means we then perform a few sequence breaks in order to get to the Master Sword, which, as I said earlier, will allow us to make Link human again and allow free transformation between the two forms. The next step is to then get to the Boomerang in Forest Temple, which will be extremely useful for long jump attacks, LGAs in short. Once that is done, we then get out of Forest Temple, perform Forest Escape by using the said LGAs, and we then rush to the Elden Twilight region, where we this time hope to get the Gorge Void, which in theory allows us to just respawn in the Twilight without having Midnight force us to be teleported away. Assuming it worked, we then perform Gorge Skip, more on that later, and activate the teleportation point in Kakariko. We then go back on the missing bridge outside Kakariko, so we get forced to teleport, which will trigger the ability to teleport just using the map itself, which is vital for map glitch. Once here, we exit the forest again, get to Lake Hylia, and then perform a pivot flip which allows us to get to Lakebed Temple early and obtain the Claw Shot early. At this point, the main task is to complete both the Eldin and Lanayru Twilight Realms. Yes, we're very sorry, Farron. You won't be saved. Once both Twilight Realms are completed, the next objective is to then go to Snowpeak in order to obtain the Golden Chain that will be necessary for the Zant fight much later in the run. Once that is done, it is then time to complete Lakebed Temple, leading us to the Midnight's Desperate Hour section of the game. At this point, we are just about halfway through the run, and when that part is over, it is now time to head to the Gerudo Desert, since that is now possible. The next half hour of the run is about getting to Arbiter's Grounds, getting the spinner, completing the dungeon, and unlocking the teleport point in front of the portal to the Palace of Twilight, so that we can come back to it with the last piece of Mirror of Twilight to unlock it. Speaking of said piece of the mirror, it is now the point in the run where we get back to Kakariko Village and perform a clip through the statue in order to access the cannon that sends you to the City in the Sky much earlier than intended, assuming you have all 300 rupees to cover the repair costs, and get into the next dungeon in the run, the City in the Sky. Once that dungeon is completed and the last piece of the Mirror of Twilight is obtained, the rest of the run can really be described as casual but fast, as we rush to the top of the Arbiter's Grounds to open up the Palace of Twilight, complete it, and then reaching Zant, where finally the ball and chain can be used. Once he is beaten, It is now that Hyrule Castle can finally be accessed, as the barrier around it is broken by Midna. From there on, we make our way to Ganondorf, do the final battle, and perform the final blow on him. And thus, Twilight Princess 80% is completed. Now, this overview obviously went very fast. I just cannot go into too many details with what's going on in the route or would be here forever. It is a 3-hour-long run after all. However, it still should be able to give you an idea of the journey that lies ahead for any runner of this category. Therefore, we shall now move on to the next section of the video, where I will be talking about the best resources to learn the category, as well as some of my own takes for certain sections of the run. Twilight Princess 80% is a challenging run that contains many scary moments. Luckily though, there is a beginner-friendly route if you want to start off with something easier. It does not include the Sword and Shield skip, and also obtains a Zora armor, meaning a few sections of the run, such as the Morpheel fight, become much easier to handle. There is a great documentation on that route made by Scarion, both a written document and a video run-through of the route. It is not a tutorial, but it can definitely be a visual aid when learning. There is also the main tutorial, also made by Scarion, that I would also definitely recommend checking out. Although it is quite old, it still remains relevant to today's runs, with quite a few changes here and there. And there also often are links to other resources from there that are also very useful to use when learning. Now, to note, you should make sure to also follow along with the route document on ZSR, and perhaps even an up-to-date run, such as the world record run, alongside it. That way, you can use Scarion's tutorial as intended, but also notice when there are changes in the route due to that tutorial being fairly old. This includes, for instance, the Forest Temple back in time to get the early boss fight flags instead of Hyrule Castle as presented in the tutorial. This also includes the current method boss key skip in Lakebed Temple, Po1 skip in Arbiter's Grounds, early boss key in City in the Sky, and a few other things. So definitely I would advise referring to that in order to learn the category as well. So now let's talk of some of the difficult sections of this run. Sword and Shield skip is quite a notorious trick to learn for beginners. It requires a very precise setup for both Link's positioning and the Bokoblins' position, as well as a precise jump timing. The best that I may recommend to start off is to look at the tutorial that Zodiac Moffat made quite a few years ago on the trick, as that details the actual cues really well, and for the most part, should give you most of what you need to get it done. It really will come down to practice. However, something that I would absolutely recommend, and this pretty much applies to any other trick, really, is that you should try and plop around with the controller display and watch how that trick is done in that run, with a display view helping you pinpoint what inputs you need precisely. Now, otherwise, what do I have to say about Sword and Shield skip? There are two main things to look out for to do in this trick. 1. The angle at which Link will actually jump. After all, if that Boko is too close to the wall, Link will therefore not be able to do the jump properly, meaning that he will not be able to reach the other side properly. However, Link himself should be fairly close to the wall. While I myself not 100% consistent with the trick yet, having a good position and angle is a lot of the hard work done, as moving that Bokoblin around isn't very easy. 2. The timing of the jump. If you manage to delay the second jump as much as possible, Link will be able to do super jump, which is what will be the key to reach the other side. However, doing that is easier said than done, because being too late will make you fail, as is jumping too early, then you only have a few milliseconds of time window to get that second jump. As said on Moffat's video, a visual cue to observe for the timing of the jump is seeing Link sliding on the ground just a bit. The jump should be done right after said slide. In any case, in the description I've uploaded a bunch of example videos and resources that you may use for this alongside Moffat's tutorial, so definitely do check these out for more help. I would also definitely recommend checking out this video by Fino, which goes a bit more in-depth in terms of the technicalities of Sword and Shield skip. And while it doesn't go specifically into any setups, it definitely is a good way to understand more about the trick. With my own lack of experience, I unfortunately cannot say much more on my own. However, hopefully these resources will help you learn well. Anyways, let's move on to the next part. Next, I would like to talk about one particular trick that took me a lot more time to understand than I care to admit. Before we get to anything, I will point you to the resource that you should definitely use in order to learn this, which is a tutorial by Dragon Bay, for which I will put the link in the description. What is really good about it is that it goes into great details in terms of most of the visual cues you will need to watch out for the trick to work, as well as both the normal and the backup strat, which is what still makes it a great tutorial now. However, there are still things to be careful about. One thing that happened to me a handful of times is despite successfully clipping out of bounds, I still couldn't have the time to reach the loading zone. If you happen to take even slightly too long to clip out, you unfortunately won't have enough oxygen to reach the loading zone, so definitely practicing the initial clip out is vital in that regard. And speaking of that, one thing that I can mention is that the spot to actually clip out of bounds is, while not too precise, definitely important to know well. See, I used to think that to clip out you just had to make sure that Link was in between the pillar and the wall, so much so that it would therefore push him out of bounds. However, just that isn't enough. Specifically, you need to make sure that Link, by the time you press Z to talk to Midna, is at that point, just above the angle here, while clipped. It is at that position that when exiting the Midna dialogue and going forward, Link will be pushed out of bounds. Something that can happen also is that you may be just under the correct area, in which case waiting for just a bit during the dialogue will lead Link to rise up and end up in the correct position. Now, unless you are doing setup less, of course, this is all assuming that you have done the setup correctly. If your initial angle or position was off from the start, chances are that Link may not end up swimming at a good position to then get pushed out of bounds in the first place. So definitely do make sure to get very familiar with the cues. And as I said earlier, Dragon Bait's tutorial does a very good job at it. Considering that neither the Forest Temple nor Faron Twilight are completed in an any% run, Gorge Skip is the only way we have to cross this gorge in Eldin. It consists in going on the other side of this fence using what we call the Rupee Roll, and then make our way around the ledge to then perform an LJA that brings us all the way to the other side. This entire trick is covered in Skyrim's full category tutorial, and you should definitely watch that. In any case, I'd like to take a minute to talk specifically about Rupee Roll. The way Rupee Roll works is that we perform an LGA to get onto the fence itself, taking a rupee on our way to it, and then use the text box of the rupee to have a buffer so we can then roll to the left and then down so that we can then land on the other side of the fence. If that roll with the rupee is not done, hence why it's called the Rupee Roll, Link will just fall back on the wrong side of the fence. Where beginners such as myself can get stuck is in getting that rupee onto the fence and then LGA at the same time. Because from the moment you dig up that rupee, the countdown until it despawns starts, and you need to be quick enough to do the setup for the LGA correctly, which can be fairly precise. While most of this will really come down to practice, there are a few things that can be done to help getting things done as fast as possible. For instance, once you're properly positioned just behind the spot and turn around, instead of just pressing the button to pull up the boomerang, also press L as you do so, which will make the animation instantly go to aiming mode, which does save probably a bit less than a second, but a precious one at that. If you're well positioned, the rupee should already be pretty much right in front of you, so you can already instantly target with the boomerang. Then, move over to the left and carefully reach for around the middle of this part of the fence. Then, get the cursor as high as possible, basically until reaching the last few pixels before the targeting prompt disappears. Then target and launch the boomerang. The difficult part comes especially in that second target, as sometimes readjusting your aiming can take a bit too long, and at that point, the rupee may have despawned. One way to know whether you were quick enough or not is to see the speed of the boomerang as you launch it. Because since it carries the rupee, you may notice that it will actually move around quite slower than when it doesn't. So if you notice that the boomerang is slower than it should be, it's a good sign. Assuming you aimed your boomerang correctly and are well positioned, you just have to wait until the boomerang reaches the fence, wait a little bit more, and then perform the LJA. As a note, do make sure to press L as Link does the jump so the camera angle is good for when you roll to the left and then down after the text box, progressively, and if everything goes well, Link will land on the other side and you've officially done Rupee Roll and are ready to do Gorge Skip, for which the tutorial should provide everything. The Morpheel fight can definitely be stressful as beginners. The fight in of itself isn't that difficult. The most difficult part of this, of course, considering we do not have the Zora armor, is oxygen management. We are extremely lucky for the fact that it even is possible to refill our oxygen underwater in the first place, using a trick while we are on the ground with the armored boots on. We then start pulling out the bomb, and when we see the animation of Link starting to pull it out, but before it actually is pulled out of his inventory, we then go and force remove the iron boots by equipping something else over them, which will result in Link grabbing the water bomb in his hands while also being in a floating state. And after a few seconds, if A is pressed to drop the bomb, the oxygen is refilled. However, this is no time to get cocky, because there are quite a few easy mistakes that can be done that can result in not being able to refill the oxygen in time, and therefore drowning. This can include, for instance, forgetting to equip the iron boots prior to latching onto Morpheel in Phase 2, resulting in not being able to let go of her and therefore not having enough time to make it back down to air refill afterwards. So, you're dead. Likewise, if you latch onto Morpheel but have the oxygen meter too low at that point, it doesn't matter that you've done the cycle perfectly, you won't have enough time to make it back onto the ground, and you will be dead. Another mistake is to simply press A too early after pulling out the water bomb when doing the air refill trick, which will also shoot Link at the top of the room, which likewise means that you won't be able to make it back down in time, and you'll be dead. Of course, another strat you can also go for is a RAGG, where you would try to latch on Morpheel twice in a row instead of coming back down, which definitely can be useful to finish the fight with the second and last cycle. This isn't something I've done myself yet, but a good resource to learn it is a video by Dragonbane that explains the basic process to do the Morpheel RAGG. So if you want to give that a try, you definitely can give that a watch, and you can find that video in the description. Those were some of the common mistakes that can easily happen while fighting Morpheel. However, if enough precautions are taken, the fight is most definitely doable. The last thing I could say perhaps is, please make sure not to run out of water bombs during the fight, because otherwise well, it's now time to talk about how safe this run is to do when it comes to a marathon. And let me just say, things are quite scary in this prospect. As established basically throughout this whole video, this run is full of scary moments where it can be easy to get stuck for a long time if you lack practice, or at least make you lose quite a lot of time if you screw up. Some of them are obvious, such as for instance dying at Morpheel and therefore having to go through the boss door skip all over again, every single time. And of course, Sword and Shield skip may be adding a lot of time to those runs if they're not practiced well enough. Some of those, however, are a bit more subtle. For instance, with back in time being frame perfect, unlike Skyward Sword, this can make things harder to do if you don't have proper cues. Luckily, the cues we have are reliable, but it can be easy to miss and could make one lose time if they aren't necessarily the best at frame perfect tricks. A few other examples of situations that can add some risk to the run include, for instance, failing to skip the trigger for the fan in City in the Sky, which would therefore require making our way through the dungeon to get to the boss key instead of just going to the room directly with the double claw shot. But luckily, a marathon save strat that could be done there is to simply save as soon as you get to the dungeon, so that you can always have the opportunity to retry if you fail it. So that's safe. So definitely, Twilight Princess 80% is not necessarily the safest game out of all the 3D Zelda games that we run in this challenge. Now luckily for the most part, as long as you do things fairly correctly, it is hard to genuinely kill the run to the point that it is impossible to complete. And therefore, a lot of safety for this run is built on one principle, which is practice. Something I don't do enough. The only exception I can think of with my inexperience is forgetting to go back to the bridge prior to completing the Eld in Twilight if Gorge Void was successful, as that means that you get soft-locked out of doing map glitch. Oh, and dying while map glitch is active will lead to soft lock too, but saving right before it is usually the safe strat to do. But either way, even some of the most difficult tricks in this run, including Sword and Shield skip, do become consistent if you keep practicing understanding it. The main difficulty of Twilight Princess 80% is that despite being a 3-hour run, it still has many difficult and scary moments. And something I'd like to say is, if I could complete this run, then so can you. And phew, we now are done with Twilight Princess 80%. This video and part of the challenge as a whole has been really tough. First off because I had quite a lack of motivation for a while, and I therefore procrastinated on it a lot. However, in the end, it remains a necessary part of the challenge, and it feels extremely satisfying to have achieved that, as cheesy as that may sound. Now is a moment where I talk about what are the next plans for the 3D Zelda challenge. But if any of my previous videos show anything, it is the fact that I am not that reliable in that regard. So, what I can say is that the last games I need to learn are Wind Waker and Majora's Mask. However, something to definitely note is that I still need to make one other video besides that, which is the Breath of the Wild one. I may already know this category, although it's been a while since I've actually done a run of that, but in any case, this will also need to be completed. So maybe the next will be that? We shall see. Who knows? So yeah, that means that until the challenge can get completed, the 3 videos you may expect are the Breath of the Wild video, the Wind Waker video, and the Majora's Mask video, and after that, we will have the challenge itself. For the sake of safety, I will not be stating an actual date as to when I should be releasing any of those videos, since as proven by my old ones, I am not too reliable in that regard. So I will close this off by saying that as usual, I will be doing all my learning and practice over on my Twitch channel, for which you may find the link in the description, and therefore that is where you will be able to follow what are my next steps in this journey. Thank you all, and see you next time for the 3D Zelda challenge. See ya!